All right, so let's get started. My name is Anna Baumann. I am the moderator of this panel where we're going to talk about revenues in esports and ask the question, where's the revenue? I'm a lawyer in esports. Most of my clients are teams, players, and I would say I know the ecosystem pretty well, but today I only ask the questions, and I get to introduce our wonderful panel. The way we would like to do this is I'm going to introduce the panel. They will tell you yourself what they're actually doing, and then we get right into the questions. When we ask questions, please feel encouraged. If you have a question, just raise your hand. During the Q&A, we really want to open up the floor for you so that you get the best benefit out of this session. All right, let's get started. So to my left, I have Tim Magnell, correct? He's the CEO of Hugh Holland. Then we have Leonard Langscheid. He's a principal at Bitkraft Ventures. Then we have Matt Camp, thanks. And he's the senior product manager at Jagex. And then, then we have Mark Reed, and he's the managing director of Haven Media. And then we have Frederick Weil, I'm sorry, and he's partnerships manager at Fnatic.
Hi. As Anne said, I am Tim Magnell. I'm CEO of Hugh Holland. We are a global media planning and buying agency focusing on the esports arena specifically. So we work with brands, event organisers, teams to strategize and globally plan and then buy all of their advertising and media space, specifically for non-endemic brands.
Hey, I'm Leonard Langenscheid. I'm a principal at Bitkraft. Bitkraft is the only investment fund that does exclusively esports investments. We've been investing for about 2 years. We have 18 investments, 18 portfolio companies that are all occupied with esports in some way. Surprisingly, none of them are teams or leagues, but generally speaking, anything else you can imagine with esports, we've probably at least taken a look at it, and absolutely love esports. Excited to be here.
Cool. Hi everyone. I work for Jagex. We make the games RuneScape and old school RuneScape. Last 2 years we've made ventures into esports, and I will be giving you the perspective of a publisher and developer, how we make money from it. I'm the product manager, which means my job is making the money. Therefore, I'm on the right panel here. Mark.
Haven Media is a marketing agency. We look after, I would like to say, almost most of the top brands that currently are engaged within esports. The kind of area of marketing we look after is supporting brands to help them manage and produce their content for social influencers and managing sponsorship of that, events, and also sponsorship of anything to do with esports, whether it be teams or tournaments, and just making sure that their activation is done on point.
Hi there. Last but not least, it's me, Frederick Weil. I work for Fnatic. It's the largest European esports team. We have over 40 players in, I think, 8 teams. It might be 9. Our CGO keeps on changing that number when he gets excited about anyone. But we have 40 players. I work in the partnerships department, so I have to do everything when it comes to getting the money into the team. And that is working with partners such as AMD or Monster Energy and delivering value not only through brand exposure, but also through content and activations.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, let's get started with a rather general question here. I think what can interest the audience is what are the main drivers for investment into esports? What kind of companies are we looking at? And what kind of strategies do you apply for short, mid to long term when you invest into esports?
I think from an investment point of view, and the way I look at it is, as we work kind of solely from the brands, it's understanding what the brands want to get out of esports when they are investing in it. I think you've got to look at the ecosystem as a whole, and actually what we do when we speak to our brands is the first thing we do is we push back on them and say, actually, why do you want to invest in esports, and understand the key kind of deliverables of what they want. We've been in meetings too many times where actually the marketing director or CMO or whoever it may be has sat there and said, well, I feel like I should be in esports, or it's the thing to be done, or it's like me walking into someone's office and saying, sports, I want to know more about that. You need to really understand kind of the context of where that money is going to go and who it's going to be invested in, the games that it's going to be invested in, and also the markets that it's going to be invested in as well. So I think from a brand perspective as well, it's educating them on those investments. Esports will not be necessarily for every single brand, just because it is the biggest growing kind of opportunity within the media space that we've seen, or the fastest growing in a long, long time. It doesn't mean that it's going to be right for every single brand. So we try and push back and understand where that investment's going to go, what's the best content, what are the best platforms to use, the best events, teams or individuals, work with them and then start building out that strategy from there.
Yeah, I think that was super well said. I think companies like yours are very useful for sort of making sure that brands are putting the money actually where it might do some work, because I do agree that a lot of, if you're just going to sponsor some random team, if you're just going to sponsor some random influencers, a lot of the young people who are watching esports are so faded where they don't even see the ad anymore. And I think you really have to make sure that you're contributing something and, understanding why you're doing it. And I think I'm glad to hear it.
Well said.
There's a really interesting thing that, from our point of view, when we're looking at brands that we want to go and represent us and our community, outside of what Jagex is, trying to find the right people that our community will connect with. Because the worst thing for us is we do an event, we'll stick on the top of the event lots and lots of shiny stuff from buffalo wings and overclockers that stroll across the screen, and our community would absolutely hate that and not engage at all. So we have to sort of work quite hard to understand what brands will work well for us, what brands that our audience already are bought in on and feel as if they've already got an affinity to, because a bad brand choice from our point of view affects our brand with their player as well. So it's not just a straightforward thing of brands coming in, it's got to work across the entire perspective from bottom to top and top to bottom at the same time.
I think, Anna, you asked the question well in terms of a short, medium and long term, because I think to understand the position of the market at the moment is that we have a lot of brands exiting out of sponsoring in esports that are your very traditional endemic brands. They often have skewed towards more Taiwanese component brands, and essentially those guys have run out of the money to afford to have some chips at the table inside of esports. What you still have now is you now have a polarization of those key brands that still have that money. They still have the affordability for now to be able to sponsor the teams and put the money in. And the bar bill, if you will, has gone up a lot over in the last 2 years. And a lot of that has been increased from the attention that it's starting to get from non-endemics. So if we go to the future, of course, you would have esports probably being dominated by non-endemics. Speaking from an endemic's perspective, for a lot of my clients, they're already at their maximum for those that are left in that space. So you will see that migration at all. I think the big question is that how quickly, because we've seen some amazing deals. I mean, obviously we're here with ESL today. We've seen DHL and Vodafone being two fantastic non-endemics have been brought into esports, but they're still dipping their toe in. In the wide world of big marketing budgets from a Procter & Gamble and a Coca-Cola, as much as they have dipped their toe in that, we're not even started that. And I think at that point, it's really about where non-endemics play. And where we're at a position right now is that at what point does it swing from one side to the other? And is there maybe a gap in that where simply the cost of of teams and tournaments starts to go up. Remember, this is very much centralized around the question around, from a sponsorship perspective. What the publishers put into the game is something completely different, and all of the other kind of revenue streams that are around esports is separate.
Thank you.
Yeah, so from a team perspective, we of course have our fans to answer to, and what we always try to do is try to make our fans come first. So we always think to ourselves, it should always be better to be a Fnatic fan, and how can our sponsors help us to make it better to be a Fnatic fan? So that's taking into account therefore we ask our sponsors the question, it's not what esports can do for you, but what can you do for esports? Because if you deliver value towards the fans and give them a great experience, they will come back to you anyways. So something great what ESL has done, I think back in ESL One Hamburg, is the partnership with Mercedes, they really pushed Mercedes into the face of the fans, but it had a negative reaction, but these guys really knew what they were doing, and they managed to turn that reaction to something where the esports audience realized, hey, they really understand the way we think, they can really make fun of themselves. So that then made that go viral like on multiple online platforms, and therefore delivering value in terms of engagement, in terms of attention, and it's still something which is there until today. So that is there from the fan aspect. In terms of like long, short term, we of course, from a team perspective, go into quite a few partnerships. Some of our longest standing partnerships are with the likes of Monster Energy, where we have now our third year of partnership just ending, looking into a fourth and a longer lasting partnership with them, but also with AMD, where we just started our third year of partnership. I hope I can say AMD at this event. But it's just looking there and trying to find the right partners who really want to go on this journey with you, because if they're not in it for the long run, they will just step in and step out and think, oh, I had a good time, or I didn't have a good time. But they really didn't try and take it upon themselves to really understand and interact with the audience.
Thank you so much. What I would like to take a closer look at, when you say you have to find the right partner, I think this is basically what everybody says here. I would like to know, what can you actually offer a partner in terms of inventory, for example, as a team, as a game publisher, when you're looking to partner up with a sponsor, for example. So what does it typically look like? What do you present to them, and what is the most promising out of that in terms of what will yield some revenue for both parties?
So, start?
I'll start, yeah. So, because we're the publisher, we're the developer, we've got the entire game. The one thing that we can do that probably no other area of the industry can do is we can offer that in-game real estate. So if we wanted to put stuff in game, it has to be right for the game, of course, so we wouldn't be able to get away with it in old school RuneScape, for example, because it would be very much against what our players wanted, but we have that ability to do that if we want. And we know that whenever somebody is playing the game or watching the game, we control what they see. So we've got the ultimate in making sure everyone sees what we want them to see. And if that is someone else's brand, then that's something that we can sell out from there.
Can I just ask a little bit more? I mean, obviously, you're the only representative of a game publisher here, but in-game inventory, I think, is a big discussion amongst teams, and particularly teams, because obviously, when you're in the vertical, you're always looking for this juicy little piece of the pie in the intellectual property of the game publisher. So, could you maybe explain a bit, like, what goes into a decision, for example, to share that with participants in the vertical, if you have teams in your ecosystem, or when do you rather decide against it?
For our game in particular, we would not do it. But there are other games that have done it. The discussions, I would guess, will probably surround around what is the right people to be in there. So, for example, I don't know who remembers this. Anybody remembers Anarchy Online from many years ago? They had billboards that they sold space for in-game, and it worked because it was designed as that exact thing. It was there to sell space for them to make money. and do advertising that way. And as long as it works within the game, it doesn't feel alien to the game that you're playing, then that is completely doable.
Right. Of course, I maybe I can also pick your brains on that, because I think it's also an interesting question to ask why, for example, offers a game publisher like Blizzard basically team uniforms on the heroes in Overwatch, and a game publisher like Riot Games and League of Legends, they don't. So what basically goes into that decision? I mean, obviously we can only speculate, but if you're participating in one of the ecosystems, in one you will get a big revenue, and in the other you won't. So
we have a little bit of experience with this with a number of different games developers and publishers in terms of working with them for different in-game items or skins or things along that line. In fact, we're doing it at the moment with Ubisoft. But I think the challenge is that different publishers and different developers will have a completely different approach to it. They are some, as Matt is kind of suggesting, that will look at their community and go, I know my community will hate that, and therefore I'm going to go in the opposite direction. There's no way I'm going to do that. My community is too important. And then there's other ones that will just say, well, how much are you willing to pay? I think that it's also the responsibility to ask the brand, what are they trying to achieve from it? And an in-game item will have an impact, but it has to be part of an overall strategy that they're trying to do to drive that affinity and that credibility within the audience. I mean, in-game advertising, in fact, there was a company that was invested by Intel around, I think, 6-7 years ago called IGA, who I believe are no more, because that wasn't, in fact, it goes against everything that gamers want to see, which is a billboard in a game, especially, for the most part, one that's not even clickable. So therefore not trackable. So the brand shouldn't want it either. So I think what we've seen is marketing develop to a point now where people understand that they've got to be authentic, they've got to be credible when they're speaking with their audience, and therefore slamming an advert in front of them is the last thing they should be doing. So it is about trying to find things that are in-game, that can be subtle, maybe even tongue-in-cheek, the community get behind. They find it fun, they find it engaging, and that's where you've managed to connect your brand properly with the community.
Understood. So what about the team inventory?
So from a team side, of course, we have the publishers, and they, of course, have the same audience we have. But as a differentiator for that is we have 8 teams, which allows us to target 8 different markets because they don't necessarily overlap. And on the other hand, it's about the emotional connection for us, because it's also good to put your logo on a screen, but if you don't have the story behind it, you don't have the experience, something to live up to, that doesn't give you a great marketing message. And something Intel have done in the past is really show like the story from becoming a bedroom gamer to becoming the pro. It's like a very, very old Intel advert, but it's something which is very, very relatable. And it's about creating these relatable moments with your pros, with your players, with anyone else in the industry, in order to really become, to really go into the field and align yourself with what these people think. Because if you just, let's say you're a O2, and then you just say, oh, we sponsor this. There's nothing much you have in the message there. But if you support the team on a grassroots level, you support the team with technology infrastructure, the amount of goodwill you'll experience from the audience really allows you to give that ROI and maybe even get some trackable returns, because that is always very, very difficult when it comes to selling sponsorship, but also then tracking it at the same time outside of reach and engagement.
I think that's a brilliant point. Maybe you can give an example how that actually looks like, because I think this is a question that is often asked, or maybe not asked that openly, but what kind of actual return can I expect when I partner up with an esports company? I mean, looking at very successful ads. So I think we're here at ESL. There is this amazing, really expensive, high production value ad in Dota. Then I would also recommend it to everybody who hasn't seen it to look at The TSM Dr. Pepper ad, it's only 15 seconds, but it's brilliantly done. Great Power Ranger reference. But what can I expect actually as a return in a situation like that? Maybe also our agencies want to talk about that a bit.
I think it very much depends on what, again, the deliverables the brand is trying to achieve. I think ROI is an extremely difficult thing to prove in any type of media. I think just because you're investing a huge amount of money, it depends what you want back from that ROI. I think if you take outdoor advertising, for example, if you do a billboard campaign in the UK and you spend £1 million, you're going to look at that and you're actually going to say, well, that's an awful return on investment, because ultimately you're not going to get those sales back. But you've got to look at the longer term view of how were people engaging with my brand, what were the perceptions of that. I think you look at digital as well. Digital media at the moment is going through a real challenge in terms of trying to prove what their ROI is back. If you're just looking for a purely sales ROI, I think it is challenging it's difficult to kind of go through and say, actually, by just sponsoring Fnatic, I've seen that there's been a 20% increase in my sales globally or what have you. I think that it's almost the wrong way to look at it. You've got to look at, firstly, what are you giving back to the community, as was mentioned, because that can be just as important as the ROI. I think you look at the community that we talk to and you look at a global esports audience, these are an audience that are not necessarily loyal to any brands yet. It's a growing audience when you look at the majority being 18 to 34. I think this is a perfect time for brands to come in, get involved and speak with this global audience in a way that they've grown up with as well. And I think the ROI is almost it's indefinite, because these can be clients, these can be consumers that you can influence and that can be with you for life. And I think that's something that brands really have to look at. And I think that's kind of the way that we talk about or talk to our brands when we do talk about ROI and what you want. It's kind of looking at the deliverables, understanding it, and then building that kind of 3, 4, 5 year plan. And if you're hitting those KPIs essentially, and you can understand that the community are receiving that, I think that's kind of more important.
If I can add to that, it's amazing on how often the brands don't necessarily know the answer to that question as to why I'm doing it, beyond I feel like
but that's very
I
important.
Should. It is, but I mean, Frederick won't mind me saying this because he's seen my presentation that I've given a couple of times where I have this big slide that says, do not sponsor a gaming team. But the next slide does go on to say, unless you're going to do the following, and I have this big long list of all the things that you need to do in order to activate that sponsorship, things that a brand needs to take responsibility to do to go to their audience and say, and we are doing this and why. You're absolutely right. The Mercedes one was a fantastic way in which that was done, even through a few hiccups. But it's about taking the imagery of the players and the euphoria about a win and integrating it into your marketing, even at the point of sale at retail. And then it's about driving the team or the tournament partner to ensure that you're reaching their audience, because you've got just as much to tell about the sponsorship of, say, a team to your audience who doesn't know anything about it, and emotionalize them around what they should know about, than it is just about digging into the audience of the following of that team as well. It's about the two, and if you're not geared up to manage that activation, manage that sponsorship, and really get the most out of it, both with your incumbent audience and also the audience of the team or the tournament or any other partnership that you're driving, then don't do it.
Understood. I saw Leonard frowning up, while the two were talking. So would you like to add anything to that, or maybe ask another question?
I'm just interested how you guys talk to your clients. Like, do you just tell them, like, all right, are you guys in it for 3 to 5 years? Otherwise, let's not talk. Like, this can't be an easy sell to be like, there is no ROI. Like, it's very vague. I just want to know. I'm interested because I've never been in one of these sponsorship talks.
I didn't say that we can't just say there's no ROI. I think it's something that you've got to look at. No, it's esports. coming into esports as a brand, it is a very challenging ecosystem. I think if you look at any other media, I think it's relatively easy to understand it because this is still something that's new. It's a lot more of a longer term process. So no, we don't walk away from a client and say, unless you're in it for 3 or 5 years, but ultimately you do also have to ask, if they are just in it for that short term, how is the community going to receive them? Because then really they are coming in to jump on that bandwagon that there's going to be X billion eyeballs and watching it. So actually you've got to, if they turn around and say, no, we only want to do it for 2 years, you kind of got to think, well, why? And also you've got to then start saying, you can't necessarily do it as a standalone piece. You've also got to look at the other media mix. If you take Intel, if you take Visa, any of these brands in esports and kind of sports as well, they have such a global strategy that esports is a part of that mix. And I think when you bring all of that together, that will help kind of identify what your ROI is. But I think putting a single kind of cost on it is a challenge for us. But we don't walk away from the table if it's not longer than 2 years. But I haven't come across a brand yet that we've spoken to that has said, I just want to do it for a year or 6 months and I want to chuck all my money at it, because there's no longevity in that.
I think also you just have to understand that usually some of these meetings that we're going to, you're explaining what esports is. And if you're not, actually you're challenging misconceptions of what esports is. And that's where Tim's absolutely right. It starts from asking the right questions. What do you want to achieve? Well, I really want to focus on this UK market. Okay, that's going to be a problem for you because esports is global. So unless we're going to look at tactics that's going to very specifically target a specific country, if indeed, like many larger companies are, their budgets are very, very regional, then that's going to be a problem for a brand. And I think, again, that misconception of what they think esports is that they might think that they want to engage with esports, but what they really mean is they want to engage with 16 to 30-year-olds that are in an online space a lot of the time. Well, you might find that actually using influencers on YouTube or Twitch might be a better vehicle to help you achieve that. So I think a lot of the challenges that we face as an agency, I'm sure Tim is exactly the same, is actually just is the education process that you go through, then drilling down as to what they actually want to achieve, and then really trying to come up with those different tactics and activations that make sense for them and can be accountable.
I thought you hit on a very interesting point here, Mark, and that is basically looking at esports as a global phenomenon. Do you really want to engage with basically a global audience? This actually, I also want to challenge that a bit. Is this really what we're doing when there are partnerships between esports brands and non-endemics? But of course, you will say it depends. I just want to throw in an example of a very interesting partnership, I believe, and that is the partnership between Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, many in this room probably know that PSG tried to be successful with their own team in League of Legends, and that didn't go so well. But most recently, they've decided to partner up with a pretty famous team in China, which is called LGD. And this is basically their foray into that market. What do you think about such partnerships in the global space, and do you expect them to be successful? Maybe, Leonard, you want to say?
Sure. I personally love that one specifically, and it might be controversial, but I really like this one because I think this one has a really big strategic value for them, where a lot of these European soccer clubs are looking to expand their fan bases to esports, and a lot of them are then teaming up to another European team or something like that, and I don't think that works super well because I don't think there's that easy of an overlap. But this particular partnership I quite like because it sort of opens up the gates to the Chinese market a lot more. I think we've already seen Bayern Munich, who's been very active in the Chinese market over the last couple of years and keep playing sort of exhibition games and whatnot. And it opened up a whole new market of merchandise for them. more for their traditional sports team, obviously, and I'd expect it to be the same case for the PSG partnership. But I think this one's a really interesting one, and one that was actually done very well. I'd be interested to hear what the rest of this panel thinks.
I agree. I think what PSG have done is a very smart move. That I think at the end of the day, you've got to look at all these football clubs. They are businesses, and they need to expand their presence in Asia. And I think I was actually looking at where PSG rank in terms of influence over in the Asian market, and they're actually only about 8th in terms of how influential they are. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of other football teams replicating what they've done with LDG. And I think something that is not dissimilar, and again is a very shrewd marketing move, is what AirAsia have done in Malaysia in terms of partnering up with their Dota 2 team, because ultimately you look at the billions of pounds that AirAsia will spend, or billions of dollars of revenue, and their marketing budgets, it's phenomenal. But actually by them bringing in almost a Dota 2 team in-house and have that authenticity throughout the company, which is what and how it was built, by getting the whole company and all the stakeholders to build into it, they can use that not only as a business side to grow within the esports and the Dota 2 community, but also as a marketing tool. And I think that's essentially what the football teams are trying to do in a similar way. And as I say, I really wouldn't be surprised seeing a lot of the other football teams do it, especially focusing on that Asia market because it's so influential.
It goes exactly what you were saying earlier about having this overall strategy for how you sell your thing. Just happens to be a football team. They want to sell their football team brand in Asia. So what's an easy way into it, or another way into it rather than an easy way? It's through an established esports group in Asia. Therefore, that's how they get into it.
Yeah,
it seems sensible.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the global strategy of a lot of these brands, they have a good presence, obviously, in Europe. And I think Europe is a hard market to crack because of the individual countries, obviously, and how different the strategies can be within that country. But you look at Brazil, you look at China, you look at America, actually it's China as a whole, you're only talking to that one country, which is or Asia. There's more of a succinct message that you can give, whereas actually the strategies that you're trying to talk to in Europe are a lot more convoluted and range. You can work with one company and their overall strategy might be the same, but the way they go about implementing that can be completely different in one market to the other. And I think that is also why we see the kind of Southeast Asia as such an important area within esports.
Yeah, the question I had is like, why Paris Saint-Germain and LGD? Why do you think Paris Saint-Germain partnered with LGD? Is it because they want to get into esports, or is it because they want to sell their football brand into China? Because that is, for me, the interesting question on it. Because, like, are you in it for the esports side, or do you really want to grow your football business?
Well, what do you think?
I think they want to grow their football business, but that's my own thought on it. The thing is, with Paris Saint-Germain, I don't know. Do you know if it was the Webedia arm? No,
absolutely not. There was basically the core marketing team within PSG that did that, and so I personally believe that it is to grow their brand, their football brand, ultimately into the Asian market, and I think it could be quite successful. But maybe going back to teams and European teams, what we're actually here also seeing is basically that sometimes you take the global approach, but as you said, the European market is hard to crack for some. So just because it's, you have all the different countries. So my question in that regard would be, is it more profitable for an esports team who operates in Europe to take a pan-European approach, or is it easier to go a localized approach in the national environment? Just to give a bit more context to that, so for example, a team called Giants, which is also a team in the EU LCS, the League of Legends premier product, league product in Europe. They have a sponsorship deal with Vodafone for Spain, and it's 7 figures. So the question is, they obviously did not, get that as as a pan-European brand. So my question is, what's the better strategy here? What works better?
So I can only talk from our side. For our side, it's the European strategy versus the localized markets, just because, for example, our League of Legends team, we have a Swede, 2 Danish, a French, and a Bulgarian. So it's really hard to really tell the country story. The only way you can tell this country story is if you go with one player and you go into that country, but then you open yourself up to the risk of roster swaps, and then you start the partnership, and then half a year later the player's gone, and then you're like, okay, why am I doing this now? We of course have different teams in different countries. For example, we had our Dota 2 team based out of Southeast Asia. We had a partnership with a local partner there, and that was their strategy for that side. So, but then their global team learned about it, and they thought to themselves, hey, we can use this globally as well. So it is really a case-by-case basis on what you decide to do in the space and what is best for you and best for the brand.
And from our point of view, most of our players are in America, so we can easily sell something just to America. If people want to target America, we can do that quite easily, because that's where we know all our players are. We've got the data to say where everybody logs in from. But I think the interesting thing that I like about countries is esports, and the marketing and the success of esports is all about the stories that are created during the esports events and the journeys, and those wonderful stories that get people excited and make people passionate. And it's very easy to make a story about a country. When we see it with the World Cup, that's in a few weeks now, that is something which is huge, it's massive, and there's no reason we shouldn't be trying to do that with esports as well. Having a country as a story, this is the English team who are going to fight against the, Iceland team, and countries get behind it, your players split up into their little groups and they form friendships in there, and then those stories come against each other. It's almost like a dream to actually make it seem more exciting.
All right, so coming back to the core question again, where's the revenue coming from? How do these industry participants actually make money, and how do they create an ROI? A big trend right now is that game publishers create so-called franchise leagues. So just to explain, in contrast to tournament systems where you, for example, can get relegated from the first league to the second, you have this one Premier League where you own a slot. And since for teams, and Frederick can maybe say a bit about that, it will be very important to become a profitable business in the near future. As most know, most of the teams aren't right now. And my question would be, how do you expect franchise leagues to impact the space? Are they a good thing? Will that result in better revenue streams for teams? What do you expect?
I think franchise league, especially like in League of Legends, might increase the fairness factor in a way. Just because Fnatic has been in the space of League of Legends for 6 years now, I would say, yeah. And we've won it 6 times. 6 times out of the 11 times it has played so far, because once every 6 months. And therefore we captured, I would say, 90% of the fan base within Europe in that one game. So it's hard for smaller teams to really get a case out there saying, hey, our fans are out there, our fans support us, and our fans will also pay attention to your product. So from that standpoint, it would help on the fairness factor. From a purely selfishly standpoint, I wouldn't like it, because it makes my job harder selling sponsorships. But at the end of the day, it helps us if the league or the ecosystem grows as a whole. And that is, I think, the outlook we have to take there, looking at the franchise leagues. Of course, looking at League of Legends, we consciously decided against going into the Overwatch League, and that was purely based on the fact that we would have to give up our own IP, which we built up over the last 14 years. So we wouldn't be allowed to be called Team Fnatic, but we have to come up with a different name. So that led us to step out of that and focus our eyes on the games we are in right now.
Can I just ask one more question? What kind of revenue streams are actually attached to a slot in a league? So we just understand what are you expecting to make money as a team when you have this slot? Because you just like, okay, so we have the audience, you already have the fans, but how do you generate revenue? How do you make money with this?
So the big difference is, like, I have to say, I'm not involved in the franchise process very deeply, so I'm just operating on hearsay and what I think it is. But like what happened in the space so far is that Riot Games captured sponsorships on the platform side and also captured all the fees they make from broadcasting, and it's those kind of revenues which will then be pulled out to the teams, which is in a revenue pool, and then will be shuffled out to the teams on that side. Yeah, so that's what I think.
Well, that's at least one good point. I mean, media rights, we've heard Riot Games has apparently sold their media rights to a company called BAMTech, and I believe it was 300 million over the course of the next, 5 years, I believe. And obviously teams expect to get a piece of the pie too if they make it into the league. If that's really the case, who knows? But that is at least one point of it. I believe you also wanted to add something to that.
It's just really to look at the question that you asked. I feel it's intrinsically tied to the last question, which is about geography. Right now, if we had a switch and all of a sudden, forget a UK team, we had a Birmingham team, but playing a Manchester team, playing a Liverpool team, and so on. So really imitating traditional football. That's the perfect scenario. That is the perfect scenario for esports, actually, both from a advertising standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, from a community standpoint. That means you can develop grassroots at a local level, and that's the perfect scenario. The problem is, at the moment, you couldn't afford that situation. There isn't the revenue within esports right now to facilitate that. Now, what Activision Blizzard done with the Overwatch leagues is almost to kind of force that situation, applying a very traditional model of these franchise teams and forcing that play. And of course, we have to remember that is yet to be proved that actually is going to work. Ultimately, it will work. It's whether that's a 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22 story. But that's where esports has to go. It has to get down to a town level, and it should do, both, again, for the community standpoint and from a revenue standpoint. But right now, there isn't the money there to support that. So to your question to Frederick, I don't know how you make that pay. Now, once you start moving into that non-endemic space and you get the larger companies, whether it be a McDonald's or whether it be a Visa or a Procter & Gamble on that, where they are used to spending hundreds of millions, then absolutely it works. But like we were talking about earlier, we're not there yet. So again, that light switch also has to coincide with that light switch, the floodgates opening, and there being $1 billion worth of advertising sponsorship revenue coming into esports, and we're not there yet.
All right. So I think we're quite at the end of our session, but we still have a couple of minutes, I believe, for questions from the audience. So I would like to open up the floor. Shoot away if you have any questions for this esteemed panel. Everybody seems quite high from the day. No questions. So, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you to the fellow panelists, and thank you.